All right, let's do this. Let's get into the advertised main topic of the day before we are joined by Xenogothic in about 20 minutes. He's on call. He's in the waiting room. He's in the green room. He requested a very elaborate rider. I've got him diet ginger ale, macaroons, bananas from South Africa. Very, very strange requests, but I had my people get it sorted. So he's chilling. He's chilling in the other room. He'll come in when we're ready. All right. The ethics of shoplifting. So I went to confession on Saturday for the first time in 7 years. I went to tell the priest all of my sins over the past 17 years, and I sat down before I did that, and I really tried to kind of go through my conscience and my memory of all the things I've done badly over the past 17 years. And I made a list, really trying to get it all out. And there was one kind of dubious set of practices that I engage in regularly. And that I wasn't sure about, and it's I regularly steal from self-checkout kiosks. Usually, on average, I guess I would probably for the past few years. Well, since they really became popular, I will generally pay for about half of it on average. I would say. So if I bring 25 pounds worth of food to the checkout, I'll maybe pay for half of that and then not ring up the other half. And I've been doing this since those self-checkout machines came out, as I suspect a lot of people do. I mean, I imagine there's much more shoplifting from those self-checkout kiosks. By the way, if it's not obvious, I think you know what I have in mind, right? They're the electronic kind of robot cashiers that you ring yourself up at, and you're supposed to pay for it all. So yeah, I've been doing that for a while, and I thought about confessing it to the priest as stealing that I've been habitually engaged in for years now. But then I thought to myself, I generally don't steal. I don't believe in stealing for the most part. I've never shoplifted traditionally. Like I would never put something in my bag when no one, like in an old fashioned store, like just put something in my pocket or my bag. I've never really done that. Maybe once or twice as a free case when I was a kid, but I've generally never done that. And it's because I do kind of find it, unethical, I guess. I'm not judging anyone who does it, but I've never done traditional shoplifting. But I have felt quite comfortable, I think. My conscience has felt relatively comfortable with shoplifting from self-checkout kiosks. And so if I was going to not tell the priest this as a confession of my sin, then I had to really kind of make the case to myself consciously. If this is indeed something that should not count as unethical or sinful. And so I put some time and effort into really thinking this through, and I think I've come to an understanding of it that I think is not just a kind of self-serving rationalization, but which I'm pretty convinced of anyway. And maybe you guys can poke some holes in it. I'm sure some of you will object to some things about it, but that's the case I'm going to make to you now. So the way that I see it is the best way to start is to lay out why, for the most part, I don't engage in stealing from stores, why I actually do think that that's unethical. And I think I'll just give a very simple, I think pretty conventional and intuitive baseline model for why stealing is actually from a store in the normal traditional way is wrong, so that I can then distinguish that from the case of self-checkout kiosks. So I would argue that one thing that's interesting just to start about stealing from stores and the ethical problem it poses is, when you go into a store, it usually doesn't say anywhere exactly that you have to like pay for the objects before you leave the store with them. Generally, it's just understood. Everyone understands that if you go into a store, you shouldn't leave unless you've paid for the objects that you're leaving with. But it's worth noting that that's not actually obvious. It's not written down anywhere. That's what we would call a convention. And I would say in the traditional case of brick and mortar stores with human cashiers, that is how things have been operating for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we all more or less do have a very strong shared sense of obligation and expectation and shared knowledge. It is a true and valid longstanding norm that thou shalt not walk out of a store without paying for an object in the store. You go up to the person who's the cashier and you pay them for it. That's, I would say, a sturdy and legitimate convention. And because of that convention, you actually do have an ethical obligation to meet that halfway. Um, so right. So why would self checkout kiosks be significantly different? Well, to me, the formal way to think about it is that the conventions for self checkout kiosks are much less understood. Like it's unethical to do traditional stealing because you're breaking a well-established norm and convention that's been around for a while. But if all of a sudden the corporations owning these stores put up these newfangled contraptions that uh, are, quite opaque, their meaning is quite unclear. What exactly are the rules for these kiosks? Is quite unclear, and so because of that, the corporations are introducing into the conventions this kind of radical um, uh, space of non-obvious intelligibility. And I would say that there are many legitimate ways to interpret the appearance of this newfangled robotic cashier machine. And so you can just already start to think about the implications. So, like for instance, again, it's not written anywhere how to use them. Like you're just assumed. Of course, they're designed to be fairly intuitive. But is it my obligation to um, like interpret such a newfangled addition to this, conventional social contract? Like maybe the way they work is you just walk up to it with the objects or commodities in your hands, and the self checkout machine just scans it automatically, like a kind of like an airport X-ray scanner, like when you walk through that machine and they check you for objects. Maybe that's how it works. I don't have any real reason to believe that's not how it works. Of course, you can make inferences that it doesn't, but all I know is I'm walking up to this strange machine that's just basically replaced 5 human workers, and it doesn't have the directions attached to it. So that's just one sort of inroad to thinking about how what we're supposed to do with these machines is ethically much less clear than some people might think. But you could keep going with this line of thinking because, like, okay, maybe I make the correct inference that I'm supposed to scan my objects through here. I see other people doing it. That's one reason why I might, that's one way to interpret these machines and their processes. So what if I swipe my object through the self-checkout machine and it doesn't, it fails to register, it fails to register the price and add it to my tab? Is that my fault or is that the machine's fault? I mean, of course you can say, "Oh, but Justin, you should know. You have to make sure the barcode lines up with the red light representing the scanner." Of course you know that, Justin. So if you're not doing that, then you're, selfishly, blinding yourself to what are, the obvious expectations and rules of this social game. Um, but it's not. I don't. And that point goes somewhat far. I get that idea for sure. But okay, what if I try to swipe with the barcode and I really do my best to run the barcode across the red light and it doesn't click, it doesn't register the price? Is it my obligation to do it again? Is it my obligation to do it again? How many times? What if the machine breaks down or something like that? The machine is systematically not working. Is it my obligation to like open it with a screwdriver and repair the machine before I leave the store with the commodities? With these kinds of thought experiments, I think you can kind of see that what I'm getting at here is that when a corporation makes a massive and unnegotiated unilateral twist and disruption of a long-standing social contract, then the corporation itself is introducing the wiggle room of not obvious intelligibility, in which I think the corporation has its own self-interested interpretation of the situation that it wants to be normalized, that it would like all of its customers to intuitively presume to be the case. But I think that like, because of technological complexity, because the simple complexity of our social and technological arrangements today, and their increasing complexity, there is legitimate and bona fide debate and ambiguity about what things even mean. So, for instance, I see these machines pop up, and all of a sudden, like 5 cashiers who used to work there are no longer there, and there are now these machines there. okay, I can make the inference I'm supposed to pay for these objects by myself at these machines. But you know, uh, maybe maybe it's quite reasonable to interpret it as, since they're saving so much money from letting go of these labor costs, from letting go of their human employees, um, maybe the implicit idea is that I only have to pay for some of my commodities. Like maybe, like honestly, and in all sincerity, like maybe you could reasonably interpret these kiosks as kind of pay what you wish machines. Like maybe this is the corporation telling me, I only have to pay what I want. Ring up the things you feel like paying for, and don't ring up the things that you don't want to pay for. I think the corporation is empowering me to do that. It doesn't say anywhere that that's not what the corporation is instituting. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of one basis for the argument I want to make, but that's not the entire argument. That's kind of chipping away, I guess, at the what a lot of people might think is the obvious expectations or social um, uh, yeah, expectations behind these kinds of newfangled technological solutions. Um, so right. What else did I want to say? Oh, so the other thing is that, like, um, you could accuse me of bad faith here. Like, you could accuse me of rationalizing. Like, Justin, you know damn well that um, you're uh, totally breaking like a longstanding traditional social convention. You know what you're supposed to do with these kiosks. You know what everyone thinks about these kiosks. And you choosing to not pay the full price at these kiosks is consciously just stealing, basically. But I don't know. Like I guess what I want to argue is that um, instituting those kiosks is itself like a rather aggressive breach of the rules. Specifically, also, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but I think this is a key point to recognize, is that these machines are literally putting new forms of labor onto me. Like, it's never ever in thousands of years been the case that, or I mean, maybe you could think of some counterexamples, but it's never been in the case that I've ever known, or that I've ever been socialized into, that you're expected to go into a store and not just pay for the objects before leaving, but that you're also supposed to like do work for the store, that you're supposed to do labor for the store in actually checking out those objects and actually carrying out that transaction. Like, it is nowhere in social convention or norms, or reasonable expectations in any kind of social contract that a customer is supposed to do labor for the corporation in facilitating the transaction. So if the corporation wants to create a new machine that just basically tries to impose this new term in the contract, in the implicit social contract that we have with them, I mean, it's welcome to try to do that. The corporation is welcome to try to kind of alter the social reality, and to make its own wagers about how behavior is going to respond. Like, that's what these kiosks are. The corporations are making calculated wagers about the costs and benefits of how people are going to interpret it. But the rules of these kiosks, they're not written anywhere. They're not clear at all. And not only are they not clear, but they actually do represent a rather aggressive and exploitative alteration of the perceived, a kind of reality that we're all kind of like trying to construct in a somewhat competitive way uh, in public spaces. So the way I see it is, like, if they're going to come out with what is a pretty bold addition or amendment to the ethical basis of exchange in public stores, they're welcome to try to do that. And I think it works quite well for them. A lot of people just take it for granted that they should pay full price for everything. So their manipulation of this social convention, I'm sure, is well calculated and working out for them. But I think that individuals such as myself and such as you, or whoever, can very reasonably and in good faith interpret the appearance of these machines in a large number of different ways. Because I guess one of the key points here is to see that the only thing that makes the stealing from a store clearly bad is because there's norms, because there's conventions. There's no explicit contract between the customer and the store. Ergo, convention is the only basis for the ethics here, is what I'm kind of trying to get at, I think. And so if corporations are going to do fundamental alterations to that contract, through leveraging new forms of technology that route around the need for the traditional human relationships that are the basis of our ethics, then I think that we are equally free to interpret the terms of that agreement creatively also. And I would even go so far as to say that not only are we ethically justified in choosing to pay what we want at self-checkout kiosks, but you could even argue that you're ethically obligated to underpay at uh, at self-checkout kiosks. I guess you could make a few different arguments in that direction. Um, you could see it as solidarity with the human beings who get fired for these kiosks. You know, like the less profitable you make the kiosk system, the more solidarity you're expressing, or not just in normative terms, but the more you're going to protect the tendency of hiring humans. You're basically chipping away at the ultra profitability of replacing humans with robots. I'm not really a Luddite like that, so I don't think too much about that line of argument, but that's one that is there that you might think about. Um, uh, Another thing that I was thinking a lot about is that one reason why traditional stealing is wrong is because it's furtive, it's secretive. If you put something in your bag without paying for it, or you kind of slip it in your pocket, you're actively hiding what you're doing, and therefore, that's a bit of data that suggests what you're doing is wrong. But with the self-checkout kiosks, another data point showing that it's perfectly ethical to underpay or pay what you want at self-checkout kiosks is that you don't have to hide anything. Like, you can just swipe the thing across the barcode scanner, and if it fails to register, maybe the barcode is like 1 inch below where it should be. Well, you're not hiding anything. You're doing it all in plain sight. It's not, if you choose to not be like extra diligent about making sure this process works exactly as the corporation wants, instead of what is more reasonable to you, then you're not hiding anything. And I think that's a I think and I think that that's actually an important piece of evidence for the idea that there's nothing ethically problematic about stealing from self-checkout kiosks, because if you're doing it in plain sight, what could really be that bad about it? So that's just another little data point that leads me to think that I think what people would normally call stealing from self-checkout kiosks is not actually stealing, I think. All right, so there might have been a few more points that I wanted to make, but that more or less covers it. Sorry, haven't been able to keep up with the chat, um, but I can maybe do that for a little bit. Well, actually, it's been very active, so thank you for all of your thoughts. But in the interest of keeping things moving, I'll have to just read these thoughts later. I'm not going to be able to respond to all of them. Um, I'm sure there are some good counter arguments or objections. Um, but one other thing I would say before we bring in Xenogothic is, or actually, maybe what we could do is, could someone who's following the chat, now that a bunch of people said a bunch of things, could someone take it upon themselves to restate maybe one or two of the biggest objections or recurring questions or comments in the chat that I wasn't able to keep up with? If you could restate a question or concern or objection that you think is especially good or important for me to think about, I would appreciate if you would type it up again right now. That'd be cool. And then I'll try to respond to it. And maybe Xenogothic can talk about it with me too, if he feels like it. Yeah, the final thing I wanted to say, though, is, two quick things. One is that, the corporations, they do pretty sophisticated economic modeling of all of this stuff, right? So when, before they decide to roll out, self-checkout kiosks, they've already calculated like how much they're going to lose from shoplifting. Like, it doesn't take a genius to recognize that shoplifting is probably going to increase from self-checkout kiosks. But they compare that, of course, to the massive labor costs that they save, and they decide, okay, it's worth it. So again, that's another data point that really, I think, kind of feeds into the argument that stealing from these self-checkout kiosks is actually quite consistent with the social norms, with the social expectations. It's expected by the corporation, even. Um, and yeah, I mean, if it turns out that people do that more than they thought, well, that's a new fact of contemporary history unfolding. But um, it just means that the norms are not what they thought they were exactly. So yeah, I guess the one of the larger implications of everything I'm saying is that in contexts of rapidly changing technology, norms are always moving so fast that what we do in our behaviors and how we conduct our ethical reflections about our own behaviors are like part of the process of deciding what norms will become, what norms will be. And so my view is like, if corporations are rapidly rapidly and constantly disrupting the conventional bases of our ethical obligations to each other, then we should also kind of accelerate our willingness to reframe creatively ethical questions and the ethical qualities of our behaviors in an equally constant and and radical and creative way. And so I think like seeing self-checkout kiosks as a kind of uh, donate what you wish machine is, it's, I see that it's perhaps somewhat creative, but I don't think it's unreasonable at all. I think it's like in many ways more than uh, more than enough, has enough, it has more than enough kind of basis, I think, to be like at least a very reasonable, at least one among other reasonable interpretations of like what what is ethical conduct around this new type of technology. I think I'll wrap it up there, and I'm perfectly on time. So it's 7:30 now. So let's see if there were any main comments people wanted to make. Um, so Strawberry Letter says, "Oh no, okay." Strawberry Letter is responding to Meta Nomad. So okay, Meta Nomad says, "You say if an item didn't scan, it's okay to steal it, but there's multiple points that will stop you stealing that item: the scales, the worker, and the door scanner. You're still justifying stealing." Maybe. I mean, in my experience with these self-checkout kiosks, you you just, no one's looking at anything and no one really cares. Like the whole point of these self-checkout kiosks is that humans don't have to really do that much to monitor, and the whole store is run by like two people who are actually present. Um, so in my experience, ethical of taking from self-checkout kiosks that I have in mind is like I'll ring like half of the items, and then the other half of the items I'll just like hold in my hand or I'll set on the floor, like off the scales. But again, I'm not hiding any of this. Maybe that's not how I'm supposed to do it, but I just take like half of the items and I either pass them across the barcode scanner where I know that they're not going to scan, in a kind of simulation of scanning them, or I just set them on the ground without even scanning them. Now, I mean, I get your point is well taken that I'm kind of doing some behaviors that to kind of blend in and look like and make it kind of look like I'm paying for everything. I'm certainly not like screaming out loud, "I'm not paying for this." Um, so I get what you're saying, but I don't know. I don't know. Um, I'm not sure. I think there's a difference between going out of your way to hide something, like sticking a lipstick in your purse. Sorry, that's gendered. That's like a very stereotypical. Sorry. Um, like there's a difference between sticking lipstick in your purse when no one's looking and you're kind of like looking to make sure there are no cameras in the corner and making sure no one's seeing you, and then running out the door. um, that that betrays a conscience of unethical conduct. But when I take things or underpay for things at the self-checkout kiosk, I'm not looking over my shoulder. I'm not like trying to escape anyone's sight. I'm not trying to like really systematically misrepresent what I'm doing or get away with anything. I'm doing things maybe in a thoughtful and strategic way. I admit, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe I have to think about it more. My sense is that if you're doing it more or less openly and you're not really trying to quote unquote get away with anything, then you're not really breaking. Like how much could you really be breaking some sort of rule if you're doing it more or less plain sight? But we can think more about that. I might be wrong. Nothing says I really think those arguments would be laughed out of court by any judge. Um, Maybe. Well, there's only one way to find out. Well, I mean, actually, after giving this live stream right now, I'll probably get arrested at my local grocery store. Um, so then maybe I'd have an epic opportunity to make these cases before a judge in a highly sensationalized media event. That'd be interesting. Um, well, I mean, I think you could imagine actually some sort of like big kind of like political theater court trial where you make the kinds of arguments I'm making now as a way to kind of have an interesting and somewhat spectacular kind of event and controversy and public, discussion opportunity around, yeah, basically machines and robots and artificial intelligence and all of that and the ethical obligations. I mean, look, basically what my intuition boils down to is like if technological acceleration means that corporations are increasingly freeing themselves from all ethical expectations that were rooted in, human, traditional human societies, then you're fucking stupid if you think that I, as a human, am going to carry on with the same ethical code that traditional humans have kind of handed down generation after generation. Like, no, if I think we also are not only justified in but also somewhat even obligated to kind of accelerate our own ethical creativity to participate in these like rapidly changing norm disruptions. Okay, I don't want to keep Xenogothic waiting too long, so sorry I didn't get to answer all of your interesting questions. There's a lot of cool, fascinating thoughts and comments and questions in the chat. So I'll try to read them later. But for now, let's bring in Xenogothic. I'm going to drop him the link, and he should be joining us at his convenience any minute now. But yeah, I hope I convinced some of you to start decreasing the payment you give to self-checkout kiosks. But yeah, so that's why I didn't tell my priest about this and why I don't think it counts as stealing. But I will keep thinking about it. I mean, I could be wrong. I tried to make the best case that I could just now and kind of laying out my intuitions about why I think that's not stealing, but it's not. It's definitely not a sealed argument. I definitely could be wrong. Abby Jones Walters, you're in my stream. Go shoplift some pizza for dinner. The person I'm staying with at this house in Cornwall just commented, telling me to go shoplift pizza. Very funny, Abby. Abby, if you wanted to, you could like walk in here and join this if you wanted. If you wanted to, we got 29 viewers up in the house. It's pretty good. I'm happy to say that this stream is growing. It seems like every time I do this, a few extra people are joined, so that's fun. By the way, I got an update just now from Xenogothic. He's in the green room. He's had a little bit too much to drink, I think. Like I said, his requested list of what's it called? The fuck, I'm losing the word when you're like a band and you get to like request things. I think he's drunk, basically. I think he's drunk off his ass. But he said he has to install a plugin. Sounds like he's just trying to buy time. We'll interrogate him when he joins us. Anyway, well, all right. So this will give me some time to check the comments here. Tac Blah, you just subbed. Thank you very much, people. Subscribe now so you can watch my later streams when they come out. Damon Mache, property is theft. Yep, there's definitely a kind of anarchist, I think, worldview, obviously, kind of behind the arguments I was making. Jan asks, or Jan, perhaps it's pronounced, asks, would stealing be your encouragement for stores to massively increase their security? Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely think you can imagine kind of increasing arms races between like strategic human beings trying to game these systems and corporations trying to institute like better and better AI that will, reduce their need for labor costs. Actually, I think IKEA. I have this hypothesis. I don't have much support for this, but it is a hypothesis. I've noticed that recently IKEA um, has they put like labels up at their self-checkout kiosks saying like, reminder, you are being watched and we will prosecute to the full extent of the law. um, and I'm pretty sure my hypothesis is that IKEA is, they probably take a massive hit from shoplifters, and as a countermeasure to try to reduce shoplifting, which they can't really enforce, they've put these reminders up. And I bet you psychologically, like a little reminder, just putting one piece of paper up at the checkout saying you're being watched. I bet you that is very effective on average, in stopping people from shoplifting. I admit it stops me. It stops me, not totally, but it makes me much more scared too, and it probably decreases the amount that I'm likely to steal from. Well, no, it's not stealing, as I just said. It's not stealing. So we need to stop using this word. We need a campaign to destigmatize taking from self-checkout kiosks. People who call it stealing should be shamed as apologists for the corporations. But yeah, the question was, is this going to increase security? Probably. I mean, I bet you before you know it, the store, all self-checkout kiosks, no human employees anywhere in the store, but the self-checkout kiosks are just way more effective, and the security apparatus is way more effective. So you can't really get away with stealing. I'm sure that's probably going to be the next like plateau that of equilibrium that we reach between kind of this ongoing competition between humans and the robotic checkout apparatuses. So I mean, realistically, I bet you that this video I'm making right now will have very limited. It'll only be relevant for a limited time only. I think sooner or later we might look back at this video and this moment where we can all get away with a lot of taking things from self-checkout kiosks. We'll look back on this period as like those wild days before all stores were like fully sealed, AI enforced lock boxes. We'll look back at this time as when you could still get away with these sorts of things before AI got really good or something like that, maybe. Ed Berger, what's up, buddy? Ed says stealing from self-checkout kiosks is undermining price making. Anti-oligopoly action. Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. That was an argument I made before, I think, more or less. But you put it more concisely. As always, Ed. Thanks, dude. You'll be looking back at it from inside a jail cell. Yo, Xenogothic, what's up, dude?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, wait, hang on. I can't hear it. One sec. I got to change my voice settings. Hang on. 1 second. I wasn't sure if you were going to dox yourself or not.
Yeah, I'll just go all in.
I need to. Sorry, Can you hear me, Xenogoth?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. I had headphones in before. I wasn't sure if you were going to dox yourself or not.
Yeah, I'll go all in. And yeah, why not?
Has your face ever been associated with your internet persona?
Not this one. No, this is a first.
Wow, I'm flattered to be the pretext for that.
Well, I felt like if it was just avatar pulsating, that wouldn't be so fun. So take one for the team.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. What I need to do actually is I need to get my headphones. Or the sound is going to be strange. But I'm in the room. I'm listening. I'm just going to step away for a second. Can you entertain our guests by maybe just telling them very briefly, like a little bit about yourself in whatever terms you want to, like however you want to describe, like maybe talk about like what you write about and what you're interested in mostly. Like what's your shtick,
Sure.
Go for it.
Well, if I'm doxing myself, I'll introduce myself as Matt. I need to get the room open actually, so I can actually see the comments. But yeah, hi.
Oh, yeah, you can open up the chat if you want. You can, if you do like in the right corner, if you go to the YouTube page and then you click the chat, you can do like pop out chat. I find that's easier.
Yeah, I had a whole nightmare with, I was in one browser and then it wouldn't allow me to accept, I had a nightmare. So now I've changed browsers. So I was all set up and now I've had to redo everything. But
yeah, no worries. There's no rush.
We're there though, we're there.
So yeah, so go on.
Cool. What do I write about? I guess I have a blog under the name Xenogothic. I write about politics, philosophy, cave Twitter shit. I think patchwork is what I've become most known for, which was unexpected. But there's a lot of good discussions that have gone around that in recent months. So I'm down for it. I was actually, when you were chatting before about the issue with the self-service checkouts, there was a comment from Meta Nomad in the chat which I liked. He was talking about those the kiosks. They're saving you time and saving the store time, so you owe the store time. And I'm not sure about the implications of that in practice, but I always. And then you were saying about the ethics based on convention, but it seems like a kind of ad hoc ethics, because I always think of, at least here in the UK, in Tesco, when you approach those kiosks, they always say, please scan your first item or have a browse. And I've never seen anyone use them to have a browse, but that would be, I think, a great way to spend some time in the store as a sort of protest, I think, because I kind of steal things that aren't barcoded, like maybe some vegetables or some pastries. Never anything bigger than that. But I never feel guilty about that because it's usually the only shops that I can think of that have those kiosks are kind of like these massive, big, monopolizing stores.
Definitely.
So I don't feel so bad about stealing their fruit and veg and bakery stuff. And I also wouldn't feel bad about wasting their time and using the self-checkout just to browse their wares.
What's your first name again? Did you say that, or are you not saying that?
Yeah, Matt.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I thought that's what it was. Calcahoon, or how do you pronounce your last name?
It's Cahoon.
Cahoon, you say?
Yeah.
Cool. And so remind me, you might have said this before when I was getting my headphones, but are you a master's student, or is that right?
I was. I'm almost exactly a year out of there now. I was a master's student at Goldsmiths.
Right. Okay. Cool. And are you still living in London, or what?
Yes. Yeah. I actually, despite no longer being a student there, I live around the corner from Goldsmiths now. I live the closest I've ever lived to the campus, and I don't even go there anymore. Just kind of hovering around in southeast London.
Okay.
I've been here about 2 years now.
Okay. Cool. And you were close to Mark Fisher, yeah?
Well, I mean, I couldn't say close really, because I became a master's student at Goldsmiths the year Mark died, so I kind of only knew him for like 3 months. Okay. But I kind of went there for his course, for Kojo Eshin's course, and it was that's a weird time.
Yeah. So you weren't too close with him personally, but you know his work well.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and definitely more so after the fact. I think it was, getting to know Mark's work was, I think, a part of how I dealt with that whole situation, really. So. Right.
Cool. So what are you working on right at the moment? Like, what's your main kind of intellectual fascination? I guess maybe we could start with.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it has just been what has been going on the blog in the past sort of 9 months. I think I started off this year. I posted a long post about Mark and the whole situation that happened last year, talking about his thought, and that kind of segued into talking about Nick Land and Patchwork, and especially talking about Mark and Nick's relationship and how their thought relates to each other. And now at the moment, as I kind of stopped writing patchwork posts quite so specifically, because I end up think people have so many questions about what that is all about, that I kind of keep feeling like I'm repeating myself or having to point back to our blog. So at the moment, I'm trying to bring a lot of the blog posts together that I've been writing the past 9 months into something. I don't know if it's a book or whatever else, but something cohesive that can actually be like a actual statement on this stuff that's a bit more concrete than blog chats and Twitter threads, as great as they are.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. That's awesome. I definitely encourage you to do that, put that together and make a book out of it. So, okay, then let's talk about that. Then tell us about your view of because I've talked about this with Yuri before in a podcast, and I've written a little bit about this, or at least I've thought about it. I would love to hear your elevator pitch for like how does like the left wing patchwork work?
Sure. I think this is where I get caught out, and where I'm getting increasingly caught out at the moment is that I don't really know how it would work.
Right. Actually, you know what? Real quick, I think a fair number of my listeners and viewers are actually not like from the political wings. So let me real quick. I'll just say for those of you who are listening who maybe have never heard of this stuff before, just very quickly, patchwork is a buzzword that's associated with neo-reactionary thought. It's generally seen as a kind of right-wing libertarian type of political idea and political model. And patchwork basically just refers to, it's associated mostly with Moldbug. And it's basically the idea of a large number of small sovereign corporations, basically. It refers to governments that are essentially corporations that own territories and have complete and absolute kind of authoritarian control over everything that goes on in the territories that they own. So the patchwork vision, as it's articulated in the kind of neo-reactionary mold, imagines basically a large number of small, more or less authoritarian corporations. But that the idea is that these would, because of the competition and because of the incentives for good governance, that this would be preferable to what we currently have, which is like a poorly managed sovereign corporation is how they see it. So people like you, Matt, and me, and also Yuri to some degree, I think actually a lot of people in like the cave Twitter orbit are interested in things like patchwork, but not necessarily. I wouldn't pigeon them whole as leftists necessarily, but a lot of us, I think, are interested in patchwork from relatively more of a left-wing perspective than like someone like Moldbug. So that's just a little bit of background for any of the listeners who like aren't coming to me from like the political angles. So sorry to interrupt, but maybe you could carry on then saying like how you see that or how that might work or what you think about that.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like, well, you mentioned Yuri, there's also Ed, I think, and I think that a lot of these discussions that Moldbug's vision of patchwork being, as you said, these kind of these sovereign microstates and how they kind of function together, kind of changing up the logistics and the dynamics of that. That's not my strong point. That's usually why I end up falling over. But I think the way that I see it is particularly from the left, or even more generally, I think it's the fact that what Moldbug and others have described is sort of their ideal of a much larger system. And if, at least coming from Mark Fisher's work, if Mark was talking about looking for alternatives and asking the question, is there no alternative? Here is a system that seems to run on alternatives. That it kind of encourages that sort of fragmenting, other kinds of thinking, other kinds of politics, other kinds of living. And as much as it's very easy, I think, maybe to deride Moldbug and a lot of the more economic stuff in terms of, at least for me, goes way over my head. But there's something attractive about that he is describing his ideal. But it's an idea that has so many more potentials, seemingly infinite potentials. And I feel like my interest is trying to figure out what other kinds of existence could be a part of that is beyond Moldbug, beyond these other kind of ideals. Like I think you have stuff like seasteading, as like seeing as this real world example of how this could look and how this could take shape, that I don't really have a lot of faith in, because it seems to be sort of Randian economics and sort of successionism under a different name. But then you have these other movements around the world that are arguing for their own kind of fragmentation, their own kind of exit from a wider structure, for politics that are even maybe globally progressive or progressive for their certain demographic, liberatory from wider systems. And I guess it's figuring out in what kind of way all of those ideas could come together. Not even come together apart in a way. What space is there for these other ideas? And does it not make sense to push those ideas and see what other possibilities there are for, not cauterize this thing because it's mold bugs, see what else is in there.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. Do you get a lot of, because if you're coming out of Goldsmiths and you are in London, I imagine your sociological milieu is fairly left leaning. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, totally.
Do you have a hard time talking about things like patchwork?
I used to. I don't, not so much anymore. I've had a lot of drunken conversations in the pub. I think the first person that planted the idea at Goldsmiths was Amy Ireland. She did a lecture last year as part of Kojo Eshen's class. But she was talking about kind of taking off from Vince Garton's Leviathan Rots essay, talking about how patchwork is inherently an anti-fascist system. And that just seemed to plant a seed for a lot of people in figuring out what that looks like. What does that her framing it that way at the time was antithetical to what most people understood about that concept as it's been pushed by Land and Melbourne. So it just planted a seed that ended up having people discuss this in more detail, what ways that could work for other ideas and demographics that were being discussed at that time. So especially in Kojo's class, talking a lot about the Middle East, about African politics, Black studies, seeing what potential this idea could have for those things.
Oh, hey, we're getting some feedback on your end, I think.
Sure.
I don't know if it's your headphones or your mic, or maybe you could tinker with something. But someone actually mentioned it in the chat a little bit ago. It wasn't that bad, but it just kind of got bad, I think.
I don't have a proper mic. It might be. Oh, I can actually hear it. That's so bizarre.
Yeah, maybe just tinker with that. Do your best. It's not that big a deal, but try to fix it if you can.
Alice, turn my mic down a little bit. Is that better?
Alice Famer in the house. Alice, is that pronounced Famer or Farmer? I never know. What's up? In my mind, I thought it was Farmer, but that's because I just look at too much stuff on the internet. Alice says you can make a noise album with your feedback.
I think I actually couldn't hear it because my headphones are on. It's so hot here at the moment that I think it's my laptop fan is going insane. So I'm going to open a window and see if it cools down.
Do your thing, man. Yeah, it's horrible. I went to Cornwall largely for that reason. I'm lucky that I have friends who live outside of the normal South Central of England, because it's the thing is, what people don't understand. I see a lot of people on the internet making fun of like British people complaining about the heat, but what people don't understand is it's not the heat so much, it's that there's no air conditioning anywhere. Like, I've lived in cities that are much hotter, that have much hotter summers than South England, but there's air conditioning. Like in the US, there's air conditioning everywhere. So when it gets to fucking 90 degrees in south of England, it's actually a really problem, because there's there's almost no air conditioning anywhere because it doesn't get that hot. So yeah, it's bullshit.
Yeah, I live in quite a nice flat here. It's the cheapest place I've lived in this city, and it's got these huge floor-to-wall ceilings. It's just like this big block of flats, but they are like a greenhouse. If on a morning, like the aircon is, you open the fucking windows, and it's horrendous.
Well, the good news is I think you solved your feedback problem.
Okay, cool.
Clearer now.
Yeah, my fan's calming down.
Cool. So why don't we get back on that? By the way, shout out to Amy Ireland. What's up, Amy? I don't know if she's here. I'm saying you mentioned her. So very cool, Amy. Very cool, Amy, breaking down barriers at Goldsmith. Amy Ireland making it acceptable to talk about patchwork. Very good. Very good. So, I mean, I've talked about this with Yuri a little bit recently in a podcast that we did, and I guess I have been talking about it with other people too. I like to think about, and I just wonder if you've ever thought about this, like how I think like a communist patch would be like a better patch, basically. What I like about the idea of patchwork is it sort of forces different political ideologies and different political models to kind of put their money where their mouth is. And it's like you can it's like if you either engineer it to work, or if you can't engineer it to work, then it doesn't get to exist. And I really, really appreciate that thrust of patchwork. So I mean, have you thought about that? Because like I suspect like for someone like you who's like interested in Mark Fisher, like Mark Fisher being kind of like a common point between you and I, if I can assume anything from that, like I think Mark was like 100% into this idea that like these are my words obviously, but that like if like communism is correct, then it should give us traction. It should give us insights to build societies and communities that are like functionally superior. And I to this day, I still really do think that. I think that like capitalism is really good at generating like social like productivity, like economic productivity at large scales across vast distances. It's like hands down the best, social technology we've ever chanced upon for generating like large amounts of coordinated, productive activity and wealth and things like this. But it does that at the cost of like significantly like a significantly inaccurate kind of like model of what human beings are. Like it forces human beings to think and speak and act and live in molds that are like highly inconsistent with what they actually are as creatures, as beings, as organisms. And I've always thought since the first day that I got really interested in like fundamentally radical, like anti-capitalist ideas, is that like the whole idea of communism is that we would creatively figure out a way to craft organizations and institutions that are more correctly and empirically aligned with like what we are, with the truth of what we are. And so I think that is very consistent with the idea of patchwork. If that's how you see communism, then patchwork should be an exciting challenge and opportunity, because it's like, okay, yeah, let's all split, let's all exit, let's all fragment, and let's engineer communism, which is, we believe, a truer expression of like human community. And if it turns out that we can't engineer that, then I'm open to accepting that means communism is wrong. But I think you could. Do you think you could? And do you have anything like to add, or any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with every word you just said. I think particularly the point about these kind of authentic human, maybe authentic is the wrong word, but these real communities that reflect human nature, like kind of without any romanticism or whatever else. I think that the part that kind of got me onto this in a way via Mark was really one of my favorite things to research, or at least last year, was the conversations that went on between Maurice Blanchot and Jean Nancy about Georges Bataille. And Bataille talking about, in his essay, The Labyrinth, he kind of talks about human nature as being founded on a principle of insufficiency. So it's the kind of his whole, in terms of like communication for him, sort of being related to Christianity with communion or all those different com words. It's kind of founded on that basis of evil, where we end up having conversations almost like there's an assumption that you don't know as much as I do, or you don't know this as much as I do, and there's always that kind of that kind of interaction that is inherent to communication. You can't talk about something if without some sort of disagreement. Maybe there has to be some sort of spark. And I think if you scale that upwards to something like patchwork, and if you're talking about city-states, and how those city-states might communicate or relate to each other, with that spark can go from being a certain level that we have now of nation states. That spark can be explosive and quite horrible. Scale it down, and I wonder if that spark can't be far more productive. And yeah, asking you to put your money where your mouth is. I think, again, building on that from Mark's point of view, I think I wrote an essay recently about his acid communism. It hasn't come out yet. I wrote it 6 months ago, and it's kind of in editor's limbo. But taking it from Deleuze, and Deleuze writing about communism, and he talks about, or desire even, and he talks about desire, revolutionary desire is always seeking new connections, and that being kind of his basis for communism. And when I end up thinking about patchwork, and especially if you have Nick Land's sort of framing of it being low integration, high connectivity, I feel like there's an explicit. I don't know if you can there's like an explicit reference there almost to this that radical sense of connection, of it being desire, revolutionary desire for, I don't know, the change for something else. I think I was kind of thinking about it in what you were saying in your last hangout, where you were talking about, it was a different hangout. I went back to one of your old videos, and I think you were talking to a friend of yours from the States, talking about how you thought that marriage was like a really radical political like statement of way of existing. And I feel like that that's kind of, that's kind of like what Blanchard talks about, where he talks about the community of lovers or something, where you have this really intense relationship that is full of desire and all sorts of things, but it's kind of built on sparks, on friction, and acknowledging that and accepting that and making that the foundation for a community. I don't know, patchwork is kind of a way of trying to scale that up or something.
Right. So I'm just curious, are you like involved in political stuff at all?
No, not really. I kind of thought I would be when I moved here, but it hasn't quite happened. I've never lived anywhere that's been quite as politically active as London, and I've never quite got into any scenes or anything. I always lived in small towns where there's not a lot going on.
Right. Well, I mean, it might be because you write interestingly and creatively on the internet. Like, that's kind of mutually exclusive with a lot of like actual organized political groups. But I mean, if you find one that's not, that's cool. Let me know about it. So what was I going to say? There was something I wanted to ask you.
That was a whole like offload there. Sorry.
What's that?
That was a whole like brain dump there.
Oh no, that's fine. That's what this is for. It's YouTube. All good. Anything you wanna dump out, man. Where are you from originally? What part of the country?
I'm from Hull originally.
Oh, okay. Cool. Is that where all your family is now?
No, they're kind of split up. They're all northeast anyway.
Word. Oh, it is Farmer. Alice Farmer. I knew it was Alice Farmer. She changed the spelling in the chat. Okay.
Oh. Hey, Alice.
But I'm not crazy. We got Alice in the house. We got Ed in the house. I don't see any other cave Twitter people, but that's cool. Right. So have you read the whole manuscript of the Acid Communism book by Mark Fisher?
No, just that. I don't think it exists. I think there's just an introduction.
Oh, okay.
I think it's an unfinished introduction. I think he sent it around to people just for general proofreading. But yeah, it kind of went around a bit after he died. It's great. It's really great, and it's definitely. I'm pretty sure it's coming out in the Repeater anthology, which I'm excited for. It's a really nice text.
Just the introduction, you said.
Yeah.
Right, but there's a larger manuscript in existence? Is there? Or no?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've not heard anything. I think I heard murmurings a while ago, and maybe there's things on hard drives and stuff, but I don't know if anyone has access to that or what. But the only thing that's kind of been floating around is just like an introduction.
Right. Cool. Just curious. Let's see. Axon says that Land argues patchwork is metapolitical, encouraging to try communist microstates, but their ultimately right-wing conclusion is only neo-cameralism survives. Yeah, I know that's what they think, but okay, here's another way to put my argument though that I've been thinking about, which is and also Meta Nomad says, Justin, a communist patch would fail due to competition. Moldbug and Land both bring this up. Right. So thank you folks for giving the kind of neo-reactionary objection. And those are all powerful arguments. I think they need to be taken seriously. But I think what I would say is that, or another way to put what I was saying that I think might be more sensible to people coming from a neo-reactionary perspective, is that the success, let's say a neo-cameral patch was successful. Let's say the long run equilibrium of patchwork is convergence towards a kind of neo-cameral, like it'd be like Singapore or something like this, this kind of model. I think it would have more communistic components than people are willing to recognize. Like, I think often about like the old like aristocratic noblesse oblige, you know, like truly authoritarian political models often have like serious communistic redistributive aspects. So one wager is that like the successful patch, or like the long run equilibrium patch, or whatever you want to call it, like the tendency of that patchwork would produce, it might be kind of authoritarian, neo-cameral type of state, or soft corp, but it might also be really redistributive. It might have like generous guarantees for the dignity of all people, because that's not inconsistent with like authoritarianism. It might just do it in a more rational way. So like you could argue that like our current societies, like we could have things like generous basic income, we could have all types of protections and communistic kind of like guarantees for like social welfare, that might actually make the entire political unit more cohesive, more competitive, happier, healthier, etc. But we don't have them in large part because of engineering, like trust issues. You know, it's hard to make credible commitments. It's hard to organize certain types of redistributive schemes. These things are like super complicated to do in a centralized way. But it's not at all inconceivable that, in other words, what I'm getting at is maybe neo-reactionaries are right in their like authoritarian political predictions for like the successful patch, but maybe communists are also right. Like maybe there's a weird convergence that we don't yet know about. There's some solution in the multidimensional space that we haven't been able to find the workable consistency for, but that's just simply because we haven't had like several thousands of competing patches in this like highly dynamic, technologically supercharged like system that patchwork seems to represent. So yeah, I one way you put it is that I think like a communist patch would win, or could win potentially. But another way to think about it is just that even what the neo-reactionaries think would happen would be way more communist than anyone realizes. Just a thought. Meta Nomad says, where is it? Not that I'm inherently averse to a commie patchwork. I mean, that's the whole point of patchwork. The problem is that each patch's definition of success. Is there any success other than survival? Well, there is success other than survival, because like survival is not actually the criteria. It's survival plus. It's survival plus. It's survival plus whatever other resources and traits and states tend to increase the probability of survival. So it's like so for instance, like I'm reading this book by Antonio Damasio about Spinoza. He's a neurobiologist, and it's basically I'm forgetting the title. It's something about Spinoza, but it's basically all about how like Spinoza was right, how Spinoza's model is like very consistent with what we now know about neurobiology, surprisingly consistent with it, very prescient in that regard. And one of the things he talks about is like he talks about Spinoza's this concept of the conatus, that like living organisms have an inherent drive to live, to survive, but also to kind of flourish. It's something. It's not just survival. It's something like to constantly, a kind of constant tendency to not just survive, but what Damasio calls like, he says that we have like our emotional states as human beings orient us towards not just like regulation of the life processes, but like survival with well-being. He uses this term, survival with well-being, because the well-being part, like that might, you could say, like the people in the chat are kind of saying, like survival sounds like it's just like that's going to select for just like the absolute bare minimum, the absolute nitty-gritty for what it requires to survive. But that's not what survival actually means, because if you're really optimizing survival, you're going to be aiming for survival plus flourishing, because that extra layer of flourishing actually, increases the probability of survival. So maybe I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but it's basically something to the effect that the competitive patches aren't just going to be aiming for this like basic brute survival existence. Whichever patch can generate like mass flourishing is actually going to be more likely to survive, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And that's why I think communism comes into play. Like even if like an authoritarian patch is the one that is the long run equilibrium, if you can have an authoritarian patch that also guarantees like a dignified quality of life for the people at the bottom, that's going to be a more successful patch than just a merely surviving patch. What do you think about that? Help me out here, man.
I feel like I often feel that when people end up talking about survival in terms of patchwork, there's always this sort of undercurrent that it's, even though we're talking about communities, it's got a slight like individualistic tone to it, as if to say that it's everyone's out for themselves, but we singularize that. And it makes me think of when in Uri's text, Skins in the Game, that was on the Vast Abrupt, and he talks about I'll get fried if I try and skim read through it, but he's talking about organisms, right? That like we're talking about survival, but we're not talking about sort of singular entities. We're talking about these kind of living, breathing things that are sort of permeable. And throughout that, you have that whole system. You have people will die, people will thrive, not necessarily violently, just in terms of that's how life goes. Like I always think about when Blanchot talks about the like birth and death are what constitute community, not necessarily what happens in between. Those are kind of limit experiences, and both those instances as events for communities are what bring communities together. So I feel like when it comes in terms of survival, if a community is going to survive, it is kind of dependent on that, on what I personally can't separate from communism, of that kind of relating to each other, a kind of quite ethical practice in a way, that is collective, like Mark Fisher talking about collective subjects. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like that for me, patchwork and the necessary changes that will have to take place, both in terms of the individual and also the state, I feel like it's maybe one of the best chances for that kind of collective subject to establish itself, because it means that we have to change how we think about all of these things. You can't talk about survival and give it that individualistic bent. It's what we're talking about when we say survival, I don't think is the same thing as what is necessary for patchwork to succeed.
Right. I agree with that. I think that's totally right. I think the issue that you come up against, though, is that most people today, sorry, it's getting dark in here. The sun is setting. I realize I'm starting to look like kind of creepy, but I'll turn the light on in a minute. But I think one of the problems that you encounter here is that it's very strange, because most of the people today who kind of like identify as left wing and would be interested in like helping to engineer the leftist like aspects of a patch, let's say, like are very turned off by, or would be very turned off by patchwork, because it's brutal. In other words, the inescapable aspect of it is reality testing. Like, you're not allowed to have ideas that don't pass a test of like functional worthiness. And there's a real problem here, because like one of the major traits that predicts for like leftism is basically like compassion. Like if you feel compassion strongly, like if you don't like the idea of people being subjected to like hard reality constraints, that you're more likely to be a leftist. Like a significant number of leftists are basically like they're kind of in protest of the fact that like reality exerts difficult constraints that are painful. And so there's a weird kind of confusion, I think, because when we talk about like engineering a leftist patch or a communist patch or whatever, it's I don't want to sound like nasty in saying this, but it's like it's very different than what people have in their minds when they think of like what communists, like the people out there who like are the public image of communism, or like the human beings out there today who are associated with leftism. Like a lot, I guess this is kind of nasty to say, but a lot of those people like wouldn't. I don't know. Like I don't know. Like how would where do those people go with patchwork? Because what I'm getting at is like they like you and I, Matt, and a bunch of other people would be like, okay, let's all stick together. Let's take care of each other. Let's like be good to each other. Let's try to figure this out in a way that respects everyone's dignity and protects everyone. And we would quickly find ourselves in trying to engineer that. We would quickly find ourselves at loggerheads with like currently living leftists who would be against like the reality principle. Because that is just like a feature of leftism as it exists in human populations today. So like that's an interesting question. Like, what do you do with that, or like what does like technomic acceleration do to that? Just trying to pose interesting questions.
Yeah,
You can think about it. I'm gonna try to get some light in here.
I think I don't want to say too much about it because I haven't read it yet. But there's, I mean, part of this, I think, is especially in terms of talking about suffering, and yeah, reality testing. I think about Fred Moten's got a new book coming out. I don't know if it's a series or something, but I think it's called Consenting to be a Collective Being or something like that. And this is kind of the interest and influence that I took from being on a course with Kojo Eshin last year. And Kojo would talking about Fred Moten stuff. And I see a lot of relationship there between what Moten talks about and what Blanchard talks about. But the specificity of Moten talking about blackness and black experience, I think is kind of a prime example of a way that patchwork can aid other kinds of communities in that way. I mean, I'm trying to think how to connect this to what we're talking about. Someone was saying in the chat about Techocanes talking about by survival, I mean in relation to other patches, not just the individuals. But I guess that's kind of what I mean is that like if you have that kind of social relation we have now, like Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, you have two groups that have been opposed to each other that are both looking to be heard. And the survival then is not necessarily just about it's about collective survival, right? And it's like you could say you had a black patch and you had a blue patch. To talk about those individual patches, that's not patchwork. Patchwork isn't. Patchwork is kind of is about the relationship between the whole, right? It's kind of a different. In talking about individual survival, I kind of also mean the survival of an individual patch. That you can't. If it's not a multiple, if there isn't that multiplicity, then it's not patchwork. Then it's just something else. Patchwork is dependent as a system is dependent on multiplicity. So then Nomad's talking about the imperial takeover. What was about a patch whose definition of success is the imperial takeover of the entire patchwork? Then it's no longer patchwork.
Right, but that could be an outcome. I mean, I think.
Oh yeah, sure.
The outcome is an open empirical question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's a failure of the system as a whole, and that's a possibility. But I don't think that's not the system, right? That is the destruction of the system as it's kind of defines itself. So you could say that that's the success of an individual patch, but it's the failure of patchwork. And I feel like that's the kind of key for me, is that, and what I feel like is relevant to the left is that it is dependent on this sense of collectivity and multiplicity that the left has often talked about in terms of, especially like D&G stuff. I'm not going to say the R word, but it's all in there, right? And it's kind of that it's a system that depends on that. And without those things, if those things fail, then the system's failed, and it's no longer that system.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you cited Moten, because I don't know his work at all, really. I mean, I know a little bit about him secondhand, but don't know his work well at all. But it's interesting that you would mention race theorists, because it's sort of, someone said in the comments that like the NRX answer to like how patches sustain themselves, you know, in terms of like cohesion and solidarity, is this idea of, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but asabia. I don't know how you say it, but you know, like religion, ethnicity, civilization, these like kind of reactionary idea of like cohesion through like racial similarity or whatever it might be. Like that's one of the reasons why like radical right-wing people are, like the white nationalist types of people are really into white nationalism and like race consciousness, is because they see it as like a really like necessary force for like cohesion and solidarity, and also sympathy and compassion and just like energy, like you know, shared will to live and to fight on. And I mean, I have zero interest in like race for that reason. I have like zero interest in like white nationalism or anything like that. Like I'm like anti-racist to the bone, and I've never even like dabbled in like white nationalist ideas or whatever. That part of like right-wing thinking has always just been anathema to me. But what's interesting though is like, as leftists or as left-leaning people, I don't want to like describe you in any way you don't want, but I still like more or less see myself as more or less a leftist, I guess. And as insofar as that's the case, like it's very kind of interesting to that, like for us to draw on like black theorists, and especially like very like race conscious black theorists, who from their own experience, you know, have very powerful narratives about like how race is really significant and a really important part of consciousness and an essential ingredient in like social movement building and things like this. And I mean, I would never object to that. I would never, you know, want to stop them from saying that or take that away from them or even push back at all, because I'm sympathetic to that for sure. But it does raise some interesting questions, because if the white nationalists say like race consciousness is like so important for, you know, like building the communities that will like survive into the future, but we say no to that, and that's nasty and we don't like that. But then like on the left, like minority races are also championing like race consciousness as like essential and necessary and good. You know, it does. Do you see like it's rather strange. Like what does one do with that? Like, especially as like, you know, not to make this like, not to turn this into like an identity politics like fest or something, but like as like white men, you know, like what do you do with that? Like, I guess maybe a more constructive way to put the question is like, if you reject like race consciousness as a white person as like a positive value, then like, how do I put this? One should have an alternative model of sources of group cohesion. And I don't know if like much progress is being made on that, or if many people are thinking about that. Like, other than, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know.
How do you mean group cohesion? Can you expand on that a bit?
Well, yeah, just the simple, you know, like what we're talking about with like solidarity or like shared, like, I mean, for any human beings to live, really, one needs to have like some sense of mission and some sense of meaning and some sense of like connectedness to like other people in a community.
Yeah.
And and it is kind of fascinating and troubling if you think about how like white nationalists say that should be race, and many leftists like especially like black and other like minority thinkers and activists on the left are also like pretty comfortable with saying that like race plays a significant similar role in their model. You know what I mean? And so it's like, as an if you're anti-racist white person, you know, like what is like the like motive, what should be the ideal kind of like motor force or like solidaristic cohesive force? Is it just like solidarity with oppressed minorities, or is it like, does one insist that like race actually doesn't matter that much, which is what I think like educated progressive white people generally say, is that like they don't, you know, race consciousness for white people is just gross and like I don't need that.
I mean, it makes me think of the I think it's Jean-Luc Nancy in reply to Blanchot. He defines communism. What does he say? I'm trying to remember the quote. He says communism is communism gives itself as a goal. It's not like it's in his view, it's not a utopian system. It's something that it's like a mindset that is based on a kind of ideal, or not an ideal, like an interrelation. That is the premise. And it always, again, I am also aware of the fact that we are two white guys talking about this, but it's kind of been in my periphery a lot, and I kind of don't want to ignore it for the sake of whiteness. Like I kind of find it really interesting.
Yeah.
But I had a friend on the course last year, and she wrote an essay that was about her dissertation was on the Harlem Renaissance. I can't remember who was part of that crowd now, but it was like a sort of radical black tradition, came out of Harlem, maybe. And there was a lot of people that were part of that group that were thinking about black experience, philosophy of black experience. And they were kind of put on CIA watch lists or whatever, and just kind of penalized for being black and politically minded. And her essay was about the fact that Russia actually offered members of this community asylum. They like offered some of them scholarships to go and study at universities there, just sympathizing with the fact that they were kind of anti-capitalist, anti this American imperialism, anti the West or whatever, in that sort of way. And regardless of the fact that they were sort of the descendants of slaves, African Americans, they kind of welcomed them, not disregarding race, but sort of kind of enacting that, right, of having and recognizing that they both share this idea of a community as a goal.
Right.
And I feel like that's something that it's common to communism, and I think it's common. I mean, yeah, okay. I think that's common to black experience as I've read about it. There are sort of crossovers there that I feel like they're really important to consider, especially considering the rep that Patchwork has got as a system.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's a good lead. I'm conscious that we've been talking for like, I think we've done an hour now. So I don't know if you're running out of steam yet, or I kind of, to be honest, I'm kind of running out of steam. Like I noticed my thoughts are kind of starting to like trail off at the end because it's now been an hour and a half for me. So
yeah, sure.
I'm not in any rush to get off though. Just noting that my brain glucose might be depleting. What are your plans for the rest of the summer?
I have none. I'm just working. My life is just working at the moment. The blog's taken a hit as a result. I'm kind of working full time now, and yeah, that is my summer.
Where do you work?
To dox myself that much.
Yeah.
I work in. Well, no, I kind of said this on Twitter before. I work in exhibitions. I do photography exhibitions, like admin stuff. that was my background of my bachelor's degree, and that's what I've ended up doing here. And I'm desperately trying to get out of it.
Exhibitions like museum or what?
Yeah, museum stuff or gallery stuff, or just doing general admin, whether that's curation or doing displays, things like that.
Okay. So but you don't like it. You're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, photographers are assholes. I don't know why I ever wanted to study photography or anything like that.
Are you like deep? Are you deep in like London art scene?
No, not at all. No, I work at one place. It's kind of like I work at one place that's not even in the art scene. It's kind of more like film industry. They just have a space where they put on exhibitions, and I help out doing that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're planning for I was doing that after I finished Goldsmiths last year. We had an exhibition open in January, and I'm working on a new one now for next January. So yeah, my summer is getting that in order, and some other things on the side too, but I can't talk about those.
Ed says he wants you to start blogging again.
I know, I really need to. I've got I'm trying to segue things into like a book or something. I also promised that after being inspired by all the fun that you've had these past couple of weeks, I promised that I'd do like a podcast radio show.
Oh yeah.
I started that. It was like halfway done, and then I was just rambling like I've been doing tonight, and I thought I need to script this. So now I'm writing a script for Nomad. Yeah. I'm doing a scripted Xenogoth disco.
Oh, interesting.
Soon.
So where is that going to be? What's like the infrastructure? Where is it hosted, or what? How are you doing that?
It's probably going to be a Mixcloud thing, I think. Okay. It's going to be about being a goth and disco and dub.
Interesting. So it's going to be music mostly, or talk too, or combination, or
I think like talking. I kind of wanted to talk about music more. I'm still fleshing it out, but I feel like being able to talk about music and play music and just like a radio show. I don't know, just play some tunes and then talk about them and get theoretical about disco and shit.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Well, you're getting a lot of love in the chat for that.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that people are up for that idea. But it's just piled the pressure on. So I'm taking my time with it. I want it to be good.
Yeah, sure. No, that's cool. I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm glad you got a plug-in at the end, and that's what people are.
Plug-in. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I would love for like this little YouTube thing I'm doing. Like, one of the things I feel like I'm most interested in is just to know what people are working on, and I like the heavy duty intellectual exchange, but I also just like shooting the breeze and kind of like learning about what people have on their agendas and like what people's goals and projects and hopes are, and like like for people to be able to share that with other people also, and like for us to mix our networks, like I think that's really, I like that idea. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So will it be like a set number of hours each week at a certain schedule, or like what?
I don't even know if I could handle each week sort of thing. Well, the idea for the first one was it was just going to be me, and then I'd quite like to talk about other people. I've talked to other people, maybe just do some like event stuff. I don't know. It's like a half-baked idea that is starting to run away with itself. So we'll just see how it goes.
Awesome. Yeah. No, the reason I ask is because like as I've just been dabbling in all these like different platforms with no real like plan or agenda. I just like play around like let's see what Google Hangouts on Air is like, and I'm just very intrigued by all the different options we have nowadays for like just firing up a computer and talking shit or writing something and whatever it might be. So I've been like, as I'm sure you've noticed, I've been on quite a spree of just like playing with different platforms really. But I've gone into all of it with very little kind of calculation. But now that I'm like doing it, and it's like I'm definitely connecting with a certain part of myself that feels like quite like good. It's like I feel like I still don't really have like a vision for like this YouTube Hangout thing I've been doing I'm starting to do it in a semi-structured way. It feels good, and like it feels really worth doing, and it's intrinsically rewarding, and it also like people seem to be in, like at least some people are into it, and it's like kind of growing a little bit. So now I'm kind of like thinking about, like, okay, I've experimented with all these platforms. Like, what really am I trying to do? Like, what am I trying to put together, and how should I like make it work, steadily and most effectively? So that's why I'm like very intrigued to hear from other people about like, just mundane things like how often will you do it, how many times a week or every month or what, because that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like right now with this, for instance, like I know with like streaming and these types of YouTube things, like everyone says that like if you really want to do it well and like grow an audience, the key is like consistency. So if you can do it like at a certain time every week, like twice a week or 3 times a week, or ideally if you can do it every day, then that works really well and people can get way more into that than if you do it irregularly. But then I'm like, how much fucking time and energy can I give it to like like that, like how much, that's why I have to like make these like reflections and decisions about like, what am I doing with all of this? Like, how serious am I trying to get with it? So I don't have answers to these questions, but these are things I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, it's crazy because there's such a, what I kind of love about this whole, it feels like there's a new blogosphere going on. You're doing the YouTube stuff. I feel like it kind of really highlights just how many interesting people are kind of involved in this shit and doing their own thing. But it is difficult to sustain that for sure. I definitely agree with you about consistency, and that was kind of my drive for blogging so much in the beginning. About like when did I start? Like late last year, and yeah, burnout is the worst, and it's a real demon that kind of I think haunts everybody trying to do this sort of thing. It's always lurking in the background somewhere.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. So I'm thinking about maybe doing this thing I've been doing, like what I'm doing with you, where I kind of for like 30 minutes, I just kind of talk about whatever I want to talk about for the fun of it, and then have a guest join me. I'm thinking about doing this as like a kind of like recurring show type of thing. Like, I don't know how serious I'll get into it, but it's been fun enough and easy enough, and worthwhile, and it feels worthwhile enough maybe to commit to doing, like, I'm thinking maybe do it like twice a week, at like set times. So who knows, like maybe if people are into it, they'll actually like kind of they'll like put it on their schedule if they want to, and maybe tune in. Or at least I'm giving them the opportunity to do that instead of currently doing it like so irregularly. So yeah, that might be the next level of like experimenting with more structure and commitment, like maybe committing to doing like 2 nights a week, specific nights, specific times. So I might do that, but I haven't decided like when would be the best time to do it, like when's good for people's availability and stuff like that. But that might be the next step.
Sounds awesome. You should continue your Bronze Age pervert investigations too, do like a serial type thing.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. But it's very strange. I have mixed emotions about that because a lot of people watch that stuff and a lot of people liked it. Like I got a lot of people have said, keep going with that. But I mean, once I did like 2, I was like, this is so ridiculous. Like, I don't want to do this. So when I made the 3rd one, it was kind of like, basically I was like, I just want to get this fucking over with, sort of. Because I didn't realize how deep I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. Because they were super time consuming to make. It was cool that a lot of people watch them, but I don't want to like spend like too much of my life making like videos like that. But I don't know, maybe I think I might experiment more with like that conspiracy theory, like comedy thriller format.
Great fun.
People like it. I mean, it's strange when you're like, when you want to think of yourself as like a fancy, like highly educated intellectual. And you write like a lot of highfalutin blog posts and you write scholarly journal articles and you try to do all this like really serious high level stuff to impress people and make them think you're really serious and mature and cool. And no one really cares about much. But then like you make a conspiracy theory like thriller series and mad people watch it and mad people really get excited about it. And they're like badgering you to make more. It's very strange. It makes me question my life decisions.
Well, but it makes you seem really approachable, I think, and it makes you sort of, I don't know, it feels like a good basis for some sort of patch down the line, kind of rallying together this strange mix of people from around the world. low integration, higher connectivity. That is your YouTube channel. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's exactly, we're on the same vibe. I think that's exactly like kind of what I guess what I'm trying to experiment with and trying to build out a bit. Yeah, so that's cool that you see that. I appreciate that, man. Well, thanks for chatting with me, and thanks for sharing all your thoughts. And I hope you make progress on that book. I definitely support you in that. I think you should definitely turn all your stuff into a book and push forward on that. There's just something about a book that people will read books when they won't read your blog posts.
For sure. Well, appreciate that. Yeah, I just need to find the time to do it. Maybe go and lock myself away somewhere during the summer if I get a chance. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, I definitely think you should. I definitely think you can. And I think when you get around to doing that, you'll definitely have a valuable and proper book that's more than worthwhile reading. So yeah, I think I definitely support that and encourage you to do that. And the radio thing sounds cool too. And everyone else seems pretty keen on it. So that's exciting, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And yeah, good turnout.
This is good. And when you make any progress on those things, definitely like shoot me a link or whatever, keep me posted. I'll share that stuff. Or actually, I'm even better. When you finally get your book out, come back on the YouTube and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, awesome.
Or like when your radio project is up and running, we can do some sort of collab on that.
Yeah, it's your turn to come and join me next.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to, of course. Good to get to know you a little bit better, man. And thanks for entertaining me for humoring my strange little YouTube startup project.
Yeah, cheers. It's been great.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
See you later.
Later.